and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to be quiet. Oops, no. Try that again. Okay, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time of peace. Okay. The God-given task. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot finish out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, and that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away.
All right. Technology, not always our friend. So, in one word, what would you say this passage is about? I heard it. Time. Yeah, time. 30 times the word time is used in this passage. That's a really big clue that that's kind of what it's about. Time. 30 times. And I just want to do a little introduction, and I'd like us to focus on and think about this fascinating subject of time and the time that is our lives. Because that's what our lives are made up of, time. So every day, each of us is granted 24 hours, or 1,440 minutes, or 86,400 seconds. And here's the interesting thing about time, is that everyone has the exact same amount of time every day. At least if you make it through the day, right? Everyone has the same amount. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, old or young, single, married, adult, child. All of us are allotted 86,400 seconds each day. So have you ever heard someone say, well, he has more time than me? It's not true. It's not true. Not really. I think when we say stuff like that, what we mean is, I think that they have more discretionary time than I do. But they don't have more time. Everyone has exactly the same amount of time. You cannot beg, borrow, buy, or steal more time, no matter how much you need it. I remember years ago there was a commercial about this, where a guy and a series of people drove through a drive-through window, and they all at the drive-through window, instead of ordering French fries and burgers, were ordering time. And I forget what the commercial was even about, but it was interesting, because they'd go and they'd order more time, and the first person would come up and say, I've got a deadline, I need to extend it, I got to buy a few hours. And they'd pay for a few hours. The next person would come and say, I need 20 minutes a day for a week. And they'd pay some money and get 20 minutes a day for a week. And the next person would say, I need 25 minutes a day and an hour tomorrow. And they'd pay. It'd be nice if you could do that, wouldn't it? It would be really, really, really nice on some occasions, especially if you could do that, but you can't do that. It can't be done. So let me ask you a question and here's where I started thinking about time. It brought me to what exactly is time? So I want to offer you a definition of time. Time is a constantly moving stretch of duration in which things happen. Right? So that's straight out of the dictionary. It's a good definition for time. So it tells us, this definition identifies for us the fact that time never stands still. Right? It is a constantly moving stretch of duration. It never stands still. It's always moving. And whatever duration that we have passed through of time, once we've passed through it, it's gone. It never, ever replicates or loops back or goes over again. There are no replays in real time, are there? There are no replays, there are no do-overs, there's no slow motion, and there's no fast forwards. It is this constantly moving duration or stretch of time in which things just happen. And time is also said to be a very valuable commodity, right? And I was thinking about that. I think that it is so valuable because of some of those characteristics of time. It's rare. It's just a moment. It's just like and it's gone. That moment I was just pointing at, it's gone. It passes by that quickly. So it's limited and it's rare and it is utterly irreversible. And that's what makes it so valuable of a commodity, precious, really. I think we just often don't realize it, and therefore we find ourselves literally wasting time because we're not grabbing on to the value of it because it's just so fleeting and so momentary and then gone. Another characteristic of time, however, is that even though it's very predictable and regular and constant, it can be somewhat mysterious too, can't it? Time, there's a certain mystery about time as well. For example, when did time begin? I have no idea if it even began, or was it always? Will it ever end? Will time ever end? Are there different dimensions of time? And if you like to watch or read sci-fi, it talks about these possible different dimensions of time. And if they are out there, what are they and how do they work? We just don't know. And although we know that time is regular and constant and consistent, however, in spite of the fact that we know that, consider how long, or in this case, how short 2 weeks of vacation seems compared to 2 weeks on a diet, right? And those two things can feel like not exactly the same amount of time at all. One can go by so quickly and one can drag by so slowly. And have you noticed how some people can seem to stay at your home longer in 1 hour, or at least it seems like it, than someone else can in a week? And I get one person spend a week with you and the time flies by, and someone else comes over for an hour and it seems like it's going on forever, you know? And it can play tricks with us like that. And how, if you're in school, how the last 5 minutes of class, just those last 5 minutes can seem like 2 times longer than your lunch break. And I remember my first year of university, stepping into university, coming to the end of my first semester, and I had to write my first ever exam, and it was a 3-hour essay exam. And I'm thinking, 3 hours? How am I going to write for 3 hours? The only thing I'd ever done for 3 hours in a row up to that point was probably watch TV. And here I'm supposed to write for 3 hours. And when that exam started and my pen hit the paper, it was like, it didn't stop. I flew through that time. And the prof would come up every half hour and write how much time was left. So he'd start with 3, 2.5, 2. And it was like he would get up there and write the next half hour off. And I'm going, what? How can that? That was like 2 minutes. That couldn't have been a half an hour. But it was. And time just raced by at like warp speed. And it can be relative in that sense. In that sense. So time and the events that take place during the span of time which we are allotted in this life. Consider it. Consider it. You only have, I only have so much of it. Right? That's what Solomon's topic for us is today, to consider. And let me give you one more concept of time to consider. And that is the concept of time and eternity. Right? Time and eternity. Because that's where he's going to take us in this discussion. Think about that. And let's jump into this thing. Solomon begins his sort of focused study, his poem really here on time, but it's really a study of time, by recognizing that there is a specific and appropriate and established time and season for everything that happens. Do you agree with that? A specific time and season for everything that happens. And in demonstrating this, Solomon names 14, right? There's 14 of them. 14 contrasts that are intended, poetically they are intended to cover all of life's events. They're 14 broad and contrasting events that are designed and intended to represent all of life's events. So let's rush through these 14 events. I'm just going to go through them really quickly, and I just want to make a couple of comments about each of them because they're very intriguing to me, very intriguing. So Solomon starts at the very beginning and the end of one's personal time, right? And that is, there is a time to be born and there is a time to die, right? So what he's doing is he's parametering for us our personal time. Our life on earth, under the sun, right? Which is sort of the theme of his book. And there are set for us parameters that are ours to live in, but not to change, right? We cannot change or lengthen or hasten those, or even get them started ourselves. They are set for us. And we are born, apparently, at the right time. Now, when Nate was born, he was 2 weeks late. When Zola was born, she was 3 weeks early. But, that's just according to physical human calendars and expectations. Truth is, they were both born, apparently, at just the right designed time for them. And we all have this also preset appointment with the end, with death as well. And my grandmother was granted, or one of my grandmothers was granted 94 years. That's pretty good. My sister was granted 19. That doesn't seem right. And yet, both had exactly the appropriately appointed time for them on this earth. Right? Now, I don't know why. I don't know why. I do not have the answers to why. It just is. And it kind of drives us crazy sometimes when we want to find the answers to those kinds of questions. And as Solomon gets to the end of this, he talks about how God has put this burden in the hearts of men. That's kind of what he's talking about, that we ask these kinds of questions, that we ponder this and don't have the answers. It's a bit of a challenge for us to deal with that too. So now everything else, that's the first one. The other 13, now they all happen within those parameters that Solomon has set out in step number 1 there. So there's a time to plant and there's a time to uproot. And even if you are not a farmer, you realize that, right? Right? We all know that there's a time to plant and a time to uproot. If you try planting your grass seed in the middle of winter when everything is ice and snow, it's not going to work. It's not the season yet. You can't do it. And if you try to skirt around the appropriate times and seasons, it just doesn't work. You can't do it. And if you want to harvest the day after you plant, it's not going to work. There's not going to be anything there for you to harvest. These things are set. They're established, and we have to work within them, right? And in our personal lives, because I think this is a sort of metaphoric of our personal lives as well, there is a time to put down roots in life. You know, and when you get older and you get married, you start to have kids, it's like there's a season now where you want to put down roots, right? And establish yourself. And then when you're young and you grow older and you hit your late teens and 20s and stuff, it's like you start to get this wanderlust and you want to pluck up and uproot and start to move around and explore. And at some point in the future, you too will put down roots. But there's a time for those things, right? There's seasons for those things. And he goes on to talk about this, a time to kill and a time to heal. Now, I think naturally we don't like that one. At least part of it. I like the time to heal part. That's good. I like it that there's a time to heal. I wish there always was a time to heal. I say yes to that, but a time to kill? Is there really a specific, established time to kill? And everything in me wants to say, no. I mean, did not God say, thou shalt not kill? How can there be actually a time and a season appointed to kill? But you see, what Solomon is doing here is he is taking a very real look at very real life as it is lived in all of its brokenness too, here on this earth under the sun, and the conditions to which we have gotten ourselves and our world into as we live out life in our allotted time slots here under the sun. And even in that, he is saying, murder even does not thwart or intervene with the appropriate established set times for everything on this earth. Are you buying it? How about this? Jesus had an appointment with death, and he was murdered. He was killed. He didn't die of natural causes. And yet he knew from the earliest point in time, and Scripture predicted from far before he ever stepped on the earth, that this is what he was coming for. It was appointed. It was appointed. He had 12 followers, 12 disciples who were going to do his will after he left. Right? Under the direction and the spiritual guidance of God, and 11 out of the 12 of them were killed. Did not die of natural causes. It seems like maybe that is the case. And Jesus kind of predicted too for them that they would go through that as well. Maybe that is part of the plan. Abraham Lincoln died. Martin Luther King Jr. died. And he knew it was coming too. If you listen to that crazy speech of his the day before he was killed, it's like he knew it was coming. He had this spiritual sense that he was moving on. Maybe these things are part of the greater design and the greater purposes of what are supposed to happen. All of those people were killed by the hands of others, and still they all seem to meet with their pre-appointed date, with death. It's hard for me to grasp that, but it seems to be what it's saying, and it seems to bear truth. He goes on to say that there's a time to tear down and a time to build up. That's easy for us to grasp. Just walk down Johnson Street, right? It's time to tear down and time to build up. It's called urban renewal, right? And in a world that we've filled so full with people, especially in certain places like cities, you know that if you're going to build something new, it probably means tearing something old down. Things wear out in our world. Things that we build, as we're the builders, as we build, things wear out. And their lives are spent, they've got to be torn down in order to build up something new. Right? There's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. You know, and as a minister, I find myself on both sides of those extremes somewhat regularly with my vocation. I did a wedding yesterday. I'm doing a wedding next week. Now, these are times to rejoice, times to laugh, times to dance, times to celebrate. I've had times actually where I've done both weddings and funerals on the same weekend. And you do this shift really quick from celebrating and laughing and rejoicing to mourning. And it's appropriate. And everything about the situation tells you and leads you into the appropriateness of that. There's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Gathering together, not just stones, but perhaps even people. To come together, there's a time to come together and to embrace one another, to support, affirm, confirm, console one another. And then again, there's also times of scattering and throwing away and spreading out and refraining, even from embracing, even pushing away. There's times for that too. Times when embraces will not be accepted, cannot be accepted. And someone just needs to have room and space and even to be left alone. There's times for that too. There's a time to search and a time to give up searching. And as we live in the province of British Columbia with the North Shore Mountains and the North Shore Rescue Team, which gets so much public exposure because people get lost in our mountains, and this courageous search team all through the year goes out and searching for people. It's interesting how when someone goes missing, how this search team, like it is like full on search. It is like aggressive, intense. Let's get out there and give it everything we've got. Search day after day after day. Intensity of searching. And then it just kind of comes to the time, and everyone seems to know it, where it's just like, okay, we've done everything we could, and it's now time to stop searching. And it's like they go from full on push search to, okay, we've done everything we could, and we stop. And everyone just kind of knows that it's right. Not that they like it, but you have to kind of accept it. And deep down you know that they've done everything you could, and hope is gone, and the search stops. There's times for both of those things. There's a time to tear. Oh, no, I'm skipping one. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. And I think this is a universal experience as well. And I mean, my goodness, how many of you have collections of things in your garages, in your basements, right? Of things you're keeping because someday I'm going to need that, right? And when do you usually get rid of it all? When you move. Yeah, and you move, and it's like, we've been living here for 14 years, we're moving now, and here's the stack of stuff that I've not looked at for 14 years. I put it there when I moved in the house because I thought I'd need it. I don't even know what it is anymore. Guess what? It's a time to throw it away, right? It's a time to toss it. And there's times for those things too. There's a time to tear and a time to mend. And yeah, I like rags. Because I work on cars and stuff, I do soaps, and I use rags for this stuff, and I like to have my rags. And there's a time to tear things up and turn them into rags. And every time I buy, not every time, once in a while I buy a shirt that I try on and it fits me nice. And it's usually a shirt that's made, if you check the tag, which I failed to do, but if you check the tag, it's made in some place where I don't even know where that is in the world. And the shirt gets washed, and guess what happens? It's like, it's still as wide as it's supposed to be, but now it's only this short. It's like, what happened? It went from here to here in one washing, and the seam goes like this, right? And it's like, the second day I have that shirt after it's been washed, I put it on, and it's like, and this happens like a couple times a year, and it's like, I get so frustrated, I tear it right off my body. I can't stand it. It's like, why does this have to happen? It drives me nuts. This is now a rag box shirt, right? There's a time to tear, but then there's times to mend too, when something is still salvageable, right? It's got something, a little rip in the seam or something, and you can still mend that, so you mend it. There's a time for both of those things. Time for both of those things. And I think that that's true kind of with the plans of our lives too, Some things you're working, and it's like, oh, that plan it's not really working out, but I think we can still salvage it, and you do what you can to salvage. And then there's times where it's like, no, we got to give up on that one. We just got to tear that one up. It's not going to work. Right? And you got to go, you got to move forward. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. Oh my goodness. And if only we were better at knowing the difference between the two sometimes, right? A time to be silent and a time to speak. And how many times have you spoken first and thought later? And then when you do get around to thinking, you go, oh, geez, I wish I never said that, right? There is a time to speak and a time to refrain and be silent. And sometimes it's the other way around too. And there's times when, man, you know you should have said something. Like I remember back when I was in high school, there was this one time where a group of guys who I was trying to get to know and sort of get in good with, and they were just really poorly treating, like abusing this verbally a girl at school. And it's like everything inside of me was saying, man, you got to say something about that. You got to speak up. And I didn't. And ever since then, I've wanted to make myself be more proactive in situations like that too, and to speak when I should, but also to be silent when I should. There's a time for both. There's a time to love and a time to hate. I bet if we think about that just a moment, that one actually makes a lot of sense. It really does. And I think when we're talking about other people, the time to love is always love other people. But there's things that we're actually commanded to hate too. In fact, Scripture says there's things God hates. That God hates. For example, he hates sin. He hates a haughty attitude, it says. And things like that. There are things and times where we need to hate as well. Romans 12 says that, Paul instructs us. He says, hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. There's a time for both of those things too. And then finally, the 14th one says that there is a time for war and a time for peace. Wow. Again, Solomon is living in a real world. And he's recognizing that it's a broken world. And there's a time for both of these things. And it's not that we want there or that it's good. It's just sometimes it happens. Sometimes it's even forced into some level of necessity. Because you see, we live in a world, unfortunately, that is still full of tyrants. It's still full of tyrants, fools, injustices, arrogance, even national arrogance from country versus country. And with real people living in this world. And I think as long as there are, there's going to be times like that come around too. And again, I'm not saying God wants it that way. It just is that way. Could God prevent that? Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the whole challenge of all of this is God could fix all of this stuff right away and level justice and bring around ultimate final judgment and finish it all off. But what would be lost? You see, justice is easy for God to bring about. Redemption, that's a harder process. That's more work. That takes more time. And that's what God's working at. So that I don't have to fall on the wrong side of judgment, because I know that I would if I'm honest about myself. I know that if he just sort of leveled it, done. We're going to correct this right now. I'm in trouble. I'm grateful that he's working through a restoration and a reclamation project that, is going to take some time, but it's going to work out way better for me and for all of us as we play into the plan that God is working. So think about those things. And as I was thinking about this, I thought one thing I could challenge you with is, what time do you think it is? What season do you think it is? Or seasons in our world? What time is it? What season is it? In your own life, what time is it? What season is it? So let me go on from here now. This is kind of the what now thing, and it's kind of neat that we have a passage like this, because really Solomon helps provide us the what now. I usually try to provide the what now, but he helps us so much with the what now in this passage, because he has this amazing song really on time and life, and then he follows it up with some conclusions and some thoughts and some where do we go with this, which is actually really good. So Solomon concludes. It's interesting because he kind of starts his conclusion with, I think, a little bit of frustration. His first line after this song exhibits a little bit of frustration. He says, what does the worker gain from his toil? Well, he asks the question, what's the point? What do you get out of all of this? What's the profit? What's the purpose? And he even goes on in verse 10 to look at the passage through time and our own passage through time and life as being kind of a burden that God has laid upon the hearts of men and women, right? There's some burden involved in all of this, and to be sure there is, right? And perhaps you sometimes get that sense or feeling of frustration in life and time and things that happen to you, right? And you can identify with some of Solomon's frustration and go, yeah, what's the point? What do you get from all of this? I mean, after all, it's interesting the way Solomon lays this whole thing out. I think, if you look at it, he does this back and forth thing of a positive followed by a negative, right? There's a time to be born, and there's a time to die, a time to mend, and a time to tear. And he does this the whole way through, right? And in between life and death, all of these things happen. All of these things happen. These positives and negatives, they happen. And you were born, I think Solomon's feeling some of this frustration too, is a lot of these things happen not by your choice at all. They just happen to you. You were born. You didn't ask to be. You know, it's not like you put your hand up and say, yeah, I'll take a shot at that life thing. Yeah, I'll get in line to be born and go with it. It just happened to you. You were thrust into this world without your consent. And then you don't really get to control much of what happens after that. You desperately want to. Sometimes we think we can. But you know what? People, places, and things, you don't really get to control. Circumstances, you don't really get to control. They just happen to you and over you and all around you. And then at some point you're going to die. As much as maybe you don't want to. It's already set. I can tell you for sure, every one of us, we've got a date with that. It's going to happen. And in between, all these things happen. The positive, the negative, the good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, fun, sad, fun, sad, fun, sad. And they all happen at their appointed time and season, and we don't necessarily get much say as to when they are and how long they are and which they are. And again, it's 14 back and forth, back and forth. And when you do that, when you add something good and then have a negative opposite it, right? Add one, take it away. Add one, take it away. Add one, what are you left with? At the end, what's the sum total? Zero. And that's what he's feeling. It's like this all amounts to nothing. This all amounts to nothing. Every good thing that happens is contrasted by something that just sort of takes it away. And he's feeling the frustration of that. He's like, what's it all about? What do you get from all of this? He's feeling like he's ending up with a big fat zero and no net gain at all, is kind of what he's feeling like. And I suppose if you look at life, you could get the feeling like that pretty easily. And I think, again, what frustrates Solomon the most in all of this stuff that just happens is you don't get to pick and choose. This is not a smorgasbord. Right? You don't like walk down the line and say, oh, I'll take one of those, I'll take one of those, oh, I'm staying away from that. Right? Oh, that doesn't look so comfortable, I'm going to stay away from that. No, you don't get to pick and choose at all. This is more like the ingredients of life rather than the smorgasbord of life. And they all just get mixed together, not by you, but by someone else. 14 contrasting, all-encompassing events. Right? They just happen. Like it or not, they happen. And I think that's part of Solomon's frustration, is because he dearly liked to be able to have some influence over these things, to make some of them happen and some of them not happen. Right? And here's the thing that we're supposed to grasp in all of this. You know, as we live our way through our time, our lives, on earth, under the sun, we're supposed to grasp this, that as life gets allotted to us, doled out and served to us, you know, all those things as they start to happen, good, bad, beautiful, hard, and as we feel so out of control, we've got to grasp the truth that God is not out of control. That he actually, at the end of it all and above it all, is very much in control. You see, God knows it all. He knows what's coming. He knows what's been, and he knows where it's going. He sees it all. And at any and every moment, he sees the beginning and the end at the same time, and everything in between as well. The past, the present, the future, even the eternal. Time doesn't work for him the way it works for us. He's not locked into it, the time continuum, as we are. He's beyond it. He's above it. He's looking down at it. He knows everything and where it's all going. And so that's the one thing. And here's the second thing, is that he is also intimately involved in all of what is served out to us in the course of life and time under the sun. And I guess here's the tricky thing for us, is that he's intimately involved in it, and we feel like we are too, right? That's called free will. We have this thing, we've been given this thing called free will, where we can make certain decisions. We feel like we can forge our path. We feel like we should be able to determine certain things, and we want to. We want to have influence in time and in the course of our lives. And we do have some. But I would suggest to you that we have very little, really. And I'm going to suggest to you that there's God who has tons of influence in all of that, ultimate influence in all of that. We have a little bit, right? And I would suggest to you that there's another force too that's vying for influence here. And it's called evil. That's out there too, wanting to direct and influence and change and shape things in ways that it wants to. And it tries to get into us and into life as well. But then God is still over it all, and none of it has more influence than he allows it to. He is over and in control of it all. Right? And here's the interesting thing too, is that he actually grabs it all and he weaves it all into his purposes ultimately. And evil thinks that it's doing its thing and pushing against whatever and trying to shape whatever, and God is just sort of over it all and weaving it all into this other tapestry that is his. He never gives up on anything. He never lets go of anything. He works it all toward his purposes and his end in its time. In its time. What does it say? It says all things are beautiful in its time. And that time is God's time. Let me read for you a couple of passages from Scripture that say this. All right? So out of Isaiah chapter 46, starting in verse 8, God speaking through the prophet Isaiah says this. God says, remember this. Keep this in mind. Keep it in your hearts, you who rebel. Remember the former things, those of long ago. He says, I am God and there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. I make known, here it is. He says, I make known the end from the beginning, the ancient times, and what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east I summon a bird of prey, and from a far-off land a man to fulfill my purpose. What have I said that I will not bring about? What have I planned that I will not do? That's God speaking. That's God speaking. And how about we make this a little bit more personal? Let's make this really personal. Out of Psalm 139, very famous psalm. Many of you are going to know it right away, know it already. Listen to this. David writing. You have searched me, O Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in from behind and from before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful to me, too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. He's admitting, I don't really understand how you do it all, but I know you do. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed down in the depths, you were there too. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created, here's the really personal part, guys, right? Listen. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes, they saw my unformed body. All the days, here it is, right? All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them even came to pass. How precious to me are your thoughts, O Lord. How vast the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Right? That's God. That's where God resides in all of this, in all of it. God is over it all. And he is also involved intimately in it all. Even in your own personal lives, he knows everything. And he is involved in everything. And he is working through everything. Everything. Now, does that mean that he likes it all? No, it doesn't mean that. He hates some of what goes on in our world. He hates the injustices, like we said, evil, haughty, and prideful spirits. He's angered by some of what goes on. He's saddened by, I think, quite a bit that goes on. But he also, as only he can do, he works with it all. He takes and he starts to bend and weave it all into the tapestry that he desires in the end. In the end. Right? And what is that end? Well, again, Solomon tells us that he will in time make all things beautiful. In its time. In his time. In his time. He might be angered about it now, but he's going to make it beautiful. He might be hurt and saddened by it now, but he's going to make it beautiful in his time. I.e., it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And this is where, oh man. So this might be the most important point, right? Focus. This is where we who are stuck under the sun, we're being implored to trust him. Right? That's what the point is. Do we trust him to do that, with that? You know? And the truth is that so often we are so close and so stuck and so limited with our micro-tunnel vision in time and space, right? Sometimes all we can see is the thing that's right here, right now. And all it is like one tiny tile on a gigantic mosaic. But that's where I am right now. That's all I can see right now. And that's what makes it hard for us. And we want to change it. And God's going, no, don't change it because it's part of the bigger picture. I've got it. You got to trust me. Trust me with it. And his mosaic, man, it goes on not just for the length of our lives, not just across the centuries, not even just across the millennium, but far into the extents of eternity. That's how big it is. And he's backed up far enough that he can see it all and knows how every piece fits in. And we get tripped up because we don't. We're right here. It's almost all we can see. And we're saying, why? Why? Ouch! No! This is not good. And he's saying, trust me. Trust me. I see more than you see. Trust me. So analogy-wise, it's kind of like this. What we do in our view of it, it's kind of like viewing and judging all of parenthood and family only by the 8 or so hour perspective of labor pains and delivery. Right? Could you imagine that? It's like that's your point in time. Man, family sucks. This hurts. This is awful. But it's bigger than that. It stretches longer than that. Let time run, and it'll all become beautiful in its time. Don't judge it by the point in time. By the point in time. That might be painful. Yeah, I know it's painful. Man, I missed breakfast and lunch. You know, when Nate was born. It was hard. I know. Not much sympathy, right? Okay, Kim went through more. I consent. But I did miss breakfast and lunch. But it's more than just that. Back up. Back up. Let more time pass. Trust God. Let your view expand and grow. And trust that his is right. He does see it all. And wait upon him and trust in him. Right? He sees so much more than we do. And he's working it all, bending it all, weaving it all into something beautiful. And Solomon talks about this whole idea of how God has placed eternity in our hearts. Right? I love that. I love it that he recognized that. God has placed eternity in our hearts. Yet, he says, we cannot capture or fathom what he's doing and his view of it. Right? We've got this idea of eternity. Right? And when we can imagine God, we can imagine eternity, we can imagine that there's more. And I think that it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. God has implanted something in us at creation that knows that there's got to be more. That just knows that this can't be it. This would just be meaningless if this was it. There must be more. And you must remember, we were originally created for eternity, not for the temporal. We were not originally created to die. We were created to live. And that's what he's pointing at. That's what he means by God has planted eternity. There's something imprinted in us that knows this can't be it. There's got to be more. Frankly, I think this is unique to humans too. I don't think animals go around fathoming this stuff. I don't think they get it. We do. It's been put in our hearts. And it's kind of more of our frustration. Because we know there must be more, but it looks like this is it. We were created for the eternal, but we're living in a temporal. Due to sin in our world and the brokenness of our world and the things that we planted in it ourselves along with evil and gave into. And now we're in this situation. We go, this can't be right. This can't be good. This is wrong. This is bad. But how do I get out of it? How do I get out of it? We were created for the eternal, but we're stuck in the temporal. And that's a frustration of ours. It's a frustration of ours. Stuck with the tunnel vision. Limited life under the sun. Though we can imagine more. We long for more. We know there must be more. That's part of the burden. The anxiety, the questions, the confusion. The out of controlness. Burden is part of the burden. It's part of the burden. Eternity is actually in our hearts. But we end up, and this is a trap, is that we end up living as though the here and the now is all that there is. That this life is all that there is. And when things start going badly, I only have one life and it's starting to go badly. It's all ruined. It's all lost. Right? Or when it starts to draw to an end. I see that a lot too. When it starts to draw to the end and you start to see I'm getting near it, there's panic. Because this must not be all there is. It doesn't feel right. And it's not right. Because that's not what we were created for. And that, again, is where God is saying, hey, trust me. I left that imprint in your heart to rattle you a bit up, so that you will ask those questions, so that you'll trust me. Because I've got the answers. I know where it's going. I've got it. Come on, I've got it. You are in my hands, and time is in my hands, and it's going to be beautiful. I'm going to make it all beautiful in its time. And in light of this, as Solomon again captures a glimpse of life above the sun, of hope and potential above the sun, because a lot of the book is written about under the sun, but here at the end of this passage is he peeks up above the sun. He gets this peek above the sun and into the eternal, and it's a good look. It's a good view. It's a great view. And as Solomon gets that little glimpse again of the good beyond this world, as he looks to God, he recognizes that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live and to enjoy life, to eat and to drink and find satisfaction in the toil that is life, right? Knowing that everything God does will endure forever, right? These things that seem so temporal, he's working them toward the eternal. He's got plans. Trust him. Go with him through life and enjoy it. Because you're going with him through life in the security of his hands, you can enjoy it. You can let go of some of the anxiety. You can put on pause those questions and just give them over to him. And you can start to let go, release, and enjoy life now. Lean on him. Give it over to him. Don't fight. Don't fret as you go through it. Trust him through it all. Nothing can be added, he says. Nothing can be taken away from life. God is ultimately in control of it all. Therefore, trust him. Revere him with awe, reverent fear. Don't fear life, fear God, but not in a panicked way, in a reverently awesome way. And in all that letting go and giving over to God, I think this is sort of the final conclusion of it is enjoy life. God wants you to enjoy life. And part of being able to do that is to embrace the seasons that come and the lack of control that we have, trusting that he's got it. If you're going to enjoy life, you've got to do that. And when we do that, we can enjoy life. And in doing that, as we start to do that, man, then just live. You live like there's no tomorrow under the sun, because there might not be, right? So just grab life and suck it up. But there is eternity with God beyond the sun, too. Live like that, too. Live like that, too. Because there will be. There will be. And I just want to conclude now by just shifting a little bit to those of us for whom the going might really be tough right now. If for you it really is hard and confusing and painful. Realize that even though it is, you still have life. That's the bottom line, is you still have life, even though it's hard. You still have the gift, the greatest gift. And therefore, you still have hope. Cling to God in faith And know again that he holds the future, and not only that, he loves you. He holds eternity and he loves you. He holds the keys of death and Hades and he loves you. And his ultimate plan is going to make it all beautiful in its time. And I dare say, the more challenge and difficulty that you might have to face and bear in this world, God will compensate for it all the more with beauty in time and eternity. I mean, what else does it mean when the Lord says things like, the last will be the first in the kingdom of heaven? Right? What else does he mean when he says that I will repay you for the years that the locusts seem to have eaten? He's gonna compensate for it, all the more so. Those who are humbled will be exalted. In Psalm 34, verse 18, it says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And man, we got to get those eternal perspectives and goggles on. And maybe read the book of Revelation more, you know? At the end of the book of Revelation, as the whole thing, the book, the Bible, time is coming to its conclusion. It says this. It says, he will come and make his dwelling amongst us. God will. And it says, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things, the broken, the painful order of things will pass away, and all will be made new. And as it was intended to be in the beginning. Right? Live like that. Trust him in those things. One last quote for you. From Rick Warren, actually. I was gripped by this quote when I read it this week. Rick Warren says that your most profound and intimate expression of worship, right? So you get your mind around that. In your whole life, your most profound and intimate expression of worship will likely be in your darkest days. So that's where it will likely be. It'll come from likely your darkest days, when your heart is broken, when you feel abandoned, when you are alone and out of options, when your pain is great, and at that point, you turn to God alone. That is your greatest expression of worship. Amen? It is, isn't it? So Lord, bless us. Bless us. And we acknowledge that you have blessed us. We're here, we're alive, we have life. We've been blessed with the greatest of gifts, life. And God, help us not to try to seize life for ourselves and to control it and direct it and do with it what we think we want to. We'll just be overrun if we try to do that. We can't do it. We can't do it. But God, help us to realize that you've got our lives in your hands, and help us to just voluntarily cooperate with what you're doing in our lives, to trust that you do see the bigger picture, the total tapestry and mosaic, and that we can rest in your hands with that. And that you will, as you promised, you will make all things beautiful in their time, which is your time. Amen. Bless us, Lord. Bless us.